I want to thank you so much, our curators and our artists who are here. We have, of the 125 artists, I think we have about 100 who've confirmed so far. So, and we're waiting to hear back from the other 25 or so. This project is something that's real as of tonight, I would say, in a certain sense, you know, so it's really quite wonderful. And I thank you all so much for being part of this. So I want to say a couple of things. I think most of you know about Smith Center for Healing in the Arts. This is our program room. We're a 17-year-old nonprofit here in Washington, D.C. We call ourselves a health, education, and arts organization. We do a lot of programs, as many of you know, for adults with cancer. Lots of different programs. We bring artists into hospitals in the community. We bring artists up to work with wounded warriors at Walter Reed. And, of course, we have the gallery. And so I would say that alchemy or transformation is at the very heart of the work that we do here. And so when we were trying to think of a project to engage the artists in our community, this notion of transformation and the alchemical vessel somehow, through our talking and plotting and planning, mysteriously made itself known as the topic for our first project like this. And I'll just say briefly that in a very real sense, this project came out of our 9/11 arts project that quite a number of you were part of a couple of years ago, our citywide arts and healing response on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. One of the things that we did around that project, which ultimately had about 30 partners and a couple hundred events, was that we met for a year with this outrageously wonderful committee of artists and healers and social activists and curators and amazing nonprofit people. We met once a month for a year and a half planning that project. And I'm still kicking myself for not taping those dialogues because they were so wonderful. And so when the project was done and some of the committee members met and the topic was, what shall we do next? How do we keep engaging with the artist/alchemist in the greater DC community to both stay engaged and create conversation and dialogue amongst ourselves as artists and curators, but then also how to engage artists with the larger community, perhaps with partners with whom don't necessarily often meet or listen to artists, you know, with some of the other members of the community. And so this project is in a way the next project that came from that dialogue, from those meetings. And it came at a time that Brooke and I were dialoguing about what show we want to show in the spring here in the gallery, and also our very real need to raise some funds for the nonprofit work that we do here. And so we did not want to create a typical art auction. You know, artists are asked very often to donate things to nonprofits. And so we wanted to create a partnership with the community where we actually had an exhibit for 6 weeks of a project that was created all together. So that's a little bit of how the Alchemical Vessel came to be. So I'm going to ask Brooke, before I've put together a kind of loose meditation on the notion of alchemical vessel. I tend to think of Smith Center, by the way, as an alchemical vessel. Both the building and the concept and the reality of being here as a vessel that makes it possible for transformation and healing work to happen. We need a container of sorts for that. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so before we do this kind of meditation on visual, since you're all visual, short PowerPoint, then I'm going to introduce our panel of extraordinary healers and artists in the community. Before we get to that, Brooke, I think, wants to give you some technical details about the vessel.
Hello, my name is Brooke Seidelman, and I'm the gallery director. And I'd like to also thank you all for joining us. And everybody's just been so enthusiastic, and we've been really blown away by the response. So I look forward to seeing what you all create. But logistically, I just wanted to point out what you're starting with. This is your raw canvas. And for those of you who might need to take off or sneak out, the one thing I wanted to point out is, being that there are 125 vessels in the show, we are going to try to plan to hang the majority of them on the wall. So while your bowl won't, when you pick up your bowl, it won't have this hook on the back of it, but we want to point it out so that you keep it in mind as you're considering, as you're transforming the vessel, to leave this part blank so that we can add the hook when you drop it off and hang it. And then we'll also be including bowl guidelines with each bowl when you pick them up. And then I also wanted to point out my partner in this, Erica Kempler, over there in the red sweater. She's the artist coordinator for this project, so a lot of you will be working with her. Again, thank you all for joining us, and I'll let you jump into the dialogue.
So, first of all, did you all get this handout? So if you haven't read it, I just want you to sort of glance at some of the names for Alchemical Vessel, because we're going to talk about, I think they're in the back. I don't know if we have any more. Thank you. Great. Yeah, she's going to come around. Sort of what we mean by alchemical vessel. And then on the back of the sheet is something called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. This is one of the most, if not the most common sort of treatise on alchemy in a somewhat modern translation. There's many translations of this. And you do not in any way need to have your vessel have anything to do with traditional alchemy, but I thought you might find it interesting because it has some of the imagery and symbols and language that's common to alchemy. So, so there you go. And then there's a sheet with a little bit of background about our wonderful panel. And then before you leave, there's another handout for when you go that just has some thinking about all the different meanings behind alchemical vessel and transformation. Okay? All right, so here we go. Let me see if I can, we might want to turn the lights down. And Brooke, what do I do to advance my slides here?
Just use this little right arrow.
Right arrow, okay, thank you. All right. I don't think so. All right. So many of you probably know that alchemy is over 2,000 years old, and it's existed in one form or another in most cultures. It seems to have originated in India or China, somewhere in that part of the world, and then traveled across the Middle East to Europe, and then down to Africa, although some people say it began in Africa as well. It seems to have appeared from shamanism, which is the origin of religion and medicine, in a way, in the world. And it certainly relates to part of the perennial philosophy. So let's see. So the alchemical vessel is a container, in its most basic form, a container for transformation. The Queen of Vessels. It's a vessel of and for the spirit. The alchemical container is no mere physical apparatus, but rather is a mystical idea, a primal image, a genuine symbol expressing something of real value within the very psyche that produced it. And I had to put this in. Maria Prophetessa, I don't know how you pronounce it, or Maria the Jewish, is the first real identifiable alchemist in the Western world. So because there's a lot of women in here, I just needed to point that out. First Western alchemist was a woman. And alchemy in the vessel, of course, is considered a feminine sort of form. Substances, taking sort of a gross substance and working with it through fire, through transmutation, through mixing it with different chemicals, through purification, to ultimately create gold. So alchemy as a science was the origin or the beginnings of our modern day physics and chemistry. But of course, it has symbolic imagery that relates to psychology, spiritual life, all kinds of different pieces of the human psyche. And it was Carl Jung who discovered in working with his patients in their dream images and in his own internal work that he found so much of the alchemical imagery of transformation kept coming up in people's dreams. And so in a way, it's Carl Jung who brought alchemy to be, revived it in a way, and to be utilized as a psychological sort of symbol. And so heaven above, heaven below, stars above, stars below, all that is above also is below. Grasp this and rejoice. So this is a primal teaching of alchemy and transformation. And I had to ask Susan Lay when she sent me an email today with her, or yesterday with her bio. She ended it by saying, as above, so below. And I thought she was referring to this alchemical principle, and she was just referring to the fact that her bio was above and below. So no accident, I think. So here's the depiction of a physical alchemy, base metals into gold through heat in this wonderful place. So alchemy is this mysterious process. It has to do with psyche and substance, you know, the relationship between being embodied as a physical person and this inner psychic transformation that happens to all of us through various things in life. And by applying a kind of consciousness to the process of suffering, you can say we come into a purified awareness or consciousness. We bring consciousness to some of the experiences of life. So here, I love this image again, the classical alchemist, but you see what's in the vessel there? It's a human figure. So this is kind of emblematic of the fact that it's not just base metals. We're talking about the human consciousness or awareness. So again, psyche as vessel, internal alchemy means our own inner awareness and growth through life. Sort of the perennial philosophy is that we all have this inner wisdom in us, and through some of the suffering in life and some of the other experiences, if we bring an awareness to that and have the right help, that we transform that into wisdom or into a different way of being in the world. So this is sort of the notion, again, of having the entire universe or the wisdom within, or in this case, carrying it. So there's 3 kinds of alchemical vessels in traditional alchemy. These are closed vessels. You've heard of a hermetic seal or hermetic vessel. It means it's closed so that when you heat it, everything stays inside. It develops a lot of tension and power inside. And some of the vessels that are used in chemical alchemy are these. They're called retorts. These are some open alchemical vessels, which is like our bowl is an open alchemical vessel, so that different things can come in and go out. You can burn off the dross, you can purify something, or you can bring in different substances or energies into the process. And of course, this is our open alchemical vessel bowl. The third type of vessel is a distillery. So distillery is, again, with heat, but this is sort of a purification through different processes. We're all sort of familiar with things that are made through the distillery process. This is kind of a modern day distillery. And so this, I won't spend much time on this, but in some of the symbology in alchemy is the black, the white, and the red. There's kind of 3 phases, sometimes 4. Sometimes yellow is a 3rd phase. But the black is sort of the unwanted material, the base metals, the suffering, or sometimes the practice of death. The shadow, in terms of psychology, dealing with the shadow or the unwanted part of our awareness. So in working with that, we move to the white or the aurora or the dawn, purification, an awareness of what is us, what is other, what's in the world, what's conscious, what's unconscious. And the bottom, the ability to hold the opposites within. So we don't have to always take sides and create the enemy. We can hold a kind of broader truth in terms of that's the kind of the next process. And the last process is the red. The goal is the philosopher's stone, sometimes called philosopher's stone, the stone of wisdom, or gold in purifying the metal. It's sometimes, the imagery is the marriage of opposites, so literally you'll see the image. The integration of opposites, or in psychological terms, individuation, or becoming fully who we are. in wholeness. So there's some wonderful sort of imagery in there. So the fire is used, you see the imagery in alchemy a lot, the fire of heat or pain or suffering, not knowing. The fear of death, I would say, not death itself. Facing death, you know, there's sometimes illness or facing death can be an entryway into the alchemical process, or wanting to bring consciousness to the processes in our life. And you see here the sun and the moon. The Ouroboros is the snake holding its tail in its mouth, which is a symbol of many things, including sort of resurrection, recurrence, the cyclical aspect of nature, non-endingness, always repeating, the ever-repeating. So again, there's a lot of talk about the balance of opposites, and I think most of us understand that in our own lives in a psychological way. Light and dark, male and female, conscious and unconscious in psychological terms. Again, the alchemical process, which I personally equate with the healing process or the coming into wholeness, is a coming to understand more about our own unconscious and bringing that into the conscious realm. Balance of heaven and earth, good and bad. And so here you see, I've thrown in a bunch of old alchemical imagery. It's so rich in imagery through so many different traditions. This again is the balance of the sun and the moon, sort of the balance of opposites within and without. And the ultimate, the red, or the third stage again, is the union of opposites. And I find this fabulous that one of the images that you see in a lot of alchemical texts for the union of opposites is this battle between the male and female. So the union doesn't mean merging and you can't tell the difference. It means a sort of balance. Does that make sense? A sort of living together in this dynamic balance. And so here's again the union of sun and moon, male and female, and all the opposites. And this is sort of, again, the union of all, including the color spectrum, which I thought was pretty interesting. Sort of the goal is this sort of balance or sense of union, and it's represented here in a mandala form, which in the mandala is another kind of container. It's a container for focus. It's a symbol of wholeness. It's a Sanskrit word meaning circle. So there's a number of mandalas here. This is a wonderful quote from Carl Jung. Can everybody see the quote to read it? Yeah. So it represents the wholeness of the psychic ground. And these, of course, are Tibetan monks creating mandalas, which they do often out of colored sand and then wash them away. This is a longer quote, but sort of an interesting one. I'll leave it for everyone to read. Again by Carl Jung. Can you see it okay? So there's something about the alchemical vessel that holds the round form or the circle form or the central point, and then everything radiating from it. An attempt at self-healing. And the mandala is a safe refuge of inner reconciliation and wholeness. Again, a container for wholeness. And you see the mandala, boy, that's hard to read. Yantra comes from a Sanskrit word for yam, Y-A-M, which means to focus or to hold in one point. And one thing about mandalas and yantras is that often they're formed on a circle form, but you see the outer box? It's a sort of gate which holds the energy inside. So for me, it's the rim of the bowl or the rim of the container. Again, another symbol for this idea of containing the energy for healing. And here's a three-dimensional yantra, again with that gate, the circle squared. The Ouroboros, again, this time kind of yin and yang, two different colors, opposites, transcendence, the return. A Tanka painting. Radiance and emptiness, it's sort of the emblem of the goal or the wholeness. So you see in this kind of holding for ceremonies is another idea of the alchemical vessel, is the space in which we do a ceremony or go for some sort of transformation of consciousness or for healing. So in early time stone circles, the womb is another idea, certainly, of transformation of the physical and the psychological, the psyche. Nature, again, the mother creating the world out of the womb. And then the labyrinth, again, as a container. Many of you, how many of you have walked a labyrinth as part? Yes. So you know the experience, it's designed for this inner experience, for this transformation of consciousness from the outer to the inner. 3 minutes. Thank you. So this is charts from 14th century. And labyrinths have one way in and one way out. They're different from mazes in that direction. They're designed for meditation and changes of consciousness. So they are a kind of alchemical vessel. Again, the alchemical vessel of the womb. And the womb is sort of spirit into form. The alchemical process is taking form and trying to extract the spirit or evoke the spirit. Does that make sense? Or consciousness, or healing, or health. So again, a kind of alchemical vessel, the altar. This is Australia, internal. The sacred vessel or urn. Mortar and pestle is a kind of alchemical vessel. Instead of fire, alchemical forms. The snakes, the balance, the wholeness. This is a double Ouroboros with the female and male triangles of balance. This I love. This is the still, something being distilled from the gross to the pure. Balance. This is from Carl Jung's Red Book, those of you that are familiar with it, one of his own drawings, and he saw the city, the diagram of the city as a mandala for community wholeness, or a vessel for community wholeness. So I put in a few images of modern day artists. So Anselm Kiefer, this is a piece called Negretto, which is the first stage of the alchemical process. It's the burning, the black, and then moves into the gold with the light coming. This is Joseph Baez, Palazzo Regale. This is a piece that he considered, this was the last piece that he did that was shown a couple of weeks before he passed away. Wolfgang Leib, the wax room. If you've been inside the wax room, that is a kind of church or temple or alchemical vessel. It's quite extraordinary, his golden wax rooms. And this is his bee pollen, which again is sort of the gold in a transcendent way of looking at the art process. Louise Bourgeois, Destruction of the Father, is again back to the black, the Negretto, taking the suffering, her experiences from childhood. And one of my favorite quotes of hers is, "I've been to hell and back, and let me tell you it was wonderful." That's sort of the alchemical process. We have to go into the dark, into the hell, into the difficult experience, and come out with something that we gain from that. So this is a modern-day alchemist. I love this image in her alchemical studio creating alchemy sound. Another modern-day woman alchemist. Look behind her. I have no idea who this artist is or what she's doing, but I had to put it in there. So in nature, we see these temple forms that are kind of alchemical vessels for ritual and traditions. The banyan tree is a natural one. The secret garden from childhood. Stonehenge, the circle that surrounds and protects. And again, the natural temples and stone. There's something about the philosopher's stone and stone and temples. And in my reading for this, I discovered that lots of Greek temples and in other cultures, the temple is built right above a cave, which again, a cave is an alchemical vessel in which we go for these experiences. So in almost every culture, you see temples built above caves where rituals took place. So the temple itself is a kind of alchemical vessel. And in many temples, particularly in the East, you find the guardians that guard the entry into the vessel is paradox and confusion. So we have to pass between the doors to get into this consciousness and awareness. We pass between paradox and confusion. So that means there's nothing wrong when that's going on. We're entering the gate of not knowing in order to get some knowledge and to go into the inner sanctum. And again, temples, this looks like the banyan tree, doesn't it? The sort of temple form. So temples in every culture all over the world, this is an interfaith temple. The inside, again, the alchemical vessel where we go, whether for meditation or ritual or community. And so less easy to represent are the subtler forms of the alchemical vessel, which is community, or the circle of trust, or group support, or family sometimes, in this circle in which we experience transformation. I love this picture. The therapeutic relationship, I think, can be and often is an alchemical vessel. And it's created with very clear boundaries in order to create that vessel, which we'll talk about tonight, and which is some of what we do here. Part of the process requires initiation. This is a very good friend of mine being initiated on the banks of the Ganges. He just passed away this past week. And so often what drives our interest in even being interested in the alchemical process in terms of our own inner life is sometimes meeting a teacher, illness, being a searcher, going through psychotherapy or analysis. Loss and grief are often initiators that throw us into the process. And even psychoactive substances can throw us into that process or be used in the process. So truth is one, paths are many. We see this alchemical process in every tradition all over the world. And the goal of the process is, the gold, is this return to wholeness, the experience of oneness with this internal wisdom or truth. So that's it. Thank you. So let's see now if we can have the lights come up. So just to, do you need my clock or should I take it? Okay. No, if you could do it, that'd be helpful. So now we have our wonderful panel of healers. And the first person, you all have the description, so I'm not going to read the descriptions of everyone. I'm going to bring this close to you. But I just want to briefly tell you, Susan Lay was introduced by a mutual friend almost 10 years ago who said to me, you must meet this woman. And Susan at that time and for many years was the executive director of the William Wentz Center for Grief and Loss. I always say the title a little bit. Is it grief and loss or healing and loss? Loss and healing, thank you.
Sometimes they used to say lost and hearing.
Lost and hearing. All right. So many of you know the William Wentz Center. It's been here for many years. It is one of the great resources in our community for people, whether it's adults or children, who've experienced a loss of a family member or are facing their own leaving of this life, or children who've lost a parent. The William Wentz Center has, I think still today, at the DC County Morgue, every day they have a therapist there to help people who experience kind of traumatic and unexpected loss. It's a wonderful resource, and Susan was part of our 9/11 project and has recently moved to Annapolis and is now in private practice. So, Susan.
Thank you, Shanti. Should I talk in the mic? Yeah.
Yes, either that or hold this, whichever's easier.
Okay. It's such an honor to be here. I feel so humbled for a couple of reasons. The first being that this center and a couple of the people in it whom I've come to know, Shanti in particular, I hold very dear, and I find myself personally renewed every time I interface with them. So for those of you that are very connected, I am jealous because I live now farther away, and for those of you that aren't, I hope you will be. So in classic form, my task tonight was to somehow or other speak to the process of therapy vis-a-vis this symbol of the alchemical vessel. And I first had to go to the dictionary to figure out what in the world I was going to be talking about, because I wasn't clued in my own experience to this, and I found it fascinating. And so I came up, because I had to, with sort of my own definition of alchemy and alchemical vessel vis-a-vis my talk this evening. And I'm going to answer that by saying that I think of it as the process of accelerated, guided transformation and the means by which this happens. And so in speaking about the process of therapy and what goes on, I sometimes think that it is a process in which we bring forth the buried gold that lies within the person that we're working with, the precious, if you will, that resides within. And I find often that it's not just the therapist, the alchemist, if you will, in this process. We don't ever make the gold. Just as the alchemist can't change lead into gold, it's already formed, it already resides within. So most of my experience professionally these last 30 years has been with impoverished communities, sometimes referred to as underserved communities. It's where my heart speaks loudest. So I think a lot of what I might say relates to work within those communities a little bit more than maybe other sectors of our community. And my orientation is not per se as analytical as my other two table mates, if I will, might address, but more coming from the biopsychosocial spiritual aspects of the work. So what is therapy, and why would we ever seek it from a stranger? For starters, we're all on a journey of inner development, of self-actualization. And what we desire, I think, significantly, is a sense of self-mastery, a sense of competence. And we find great comfort and purpose in this strength that we carry within us. So when life challenges happen, and they always do, doesn't matter your circumstances, life challenges will happen, we instinctively try to master them on our own. And occasionally we may seek the help of those who are very close to us, those who are already a part of our trust circle. Therapy for many is a last resort. Again, I'm speaking of a community I've worked with a great deal. So unlike many communities where talk therapy is pretty well understood and probably highly valued, it's not always the case in impoverished communities. And what I find instead is that it's a bit foreign, and there's a great deal of distrust in the process and in the professional who's delivering the service. So the very essence of therapy sometimes for the clients that we've worked with is fix it. I'm coming to you so that you can fix it. You can change it, you can mold it, you can create it, you can impact it, you can give me the advice I need, you can give me the prescription I need, but I need you to fix it. And therapy is a shared process. So from the get-go, we're starting from a different point of reference. So why do clients come into therapy? In general, because they're in some sort of acute distress. Their normal coping, their normal supports, and the challenges that are facing them are overwhelming. And they're looking for someone else who maybe has that expertise to impact them. I've always said that I thought that going into therapy, into counseling, as many communities prefer to speak of it, that it required great courage and a great sense of humility. Because by asking for help, our clients are putting forth their vulnerability, their pain, their sense of powerlessness, and they're sharing with us, the therapist, deep, 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 meaningful, sacred aspects of themselves or their life. And it's an honor to have that shared experience with them. The clients who come often feel sad, they often feel discouraged, And what we find is that the two most prevalent reasons for why folks get into therapy is due to depression or anxiety. More common than anything else. So when clients step into therapy, if you will, I would want to compare it to stepping into this healing space, this sacred vessel where transformation is possible. And I think that this requires a great deal of hope. Often our clients come to us hopeless, and what we look for is that glimmer of hope to make change possible. I'd suggest that the therapist serves as the alchemist for this process, but I'd also suggest that the therapist is also in this process. So it's not just a doing or an impacting from therapist to client, but it's a shared experience in which both are transformed. Initially, you've got two strangers who are trying to get to know each other. There's a power differential. It's called fee-for-service, managed care. It's called a lot of things. But there's a power differential. And this power differential and this unknown between people needs to be consciously, thoughtfully, gradually, gently overcome. So ideally, the therapeutic space, the physical space, if you will, where the healing work begins, has to be very inviting. It has to be comfortable. It has to be pleasant. And most importantly, it has to feel safe. And in this sheltered space, which we clinically speak of as this holding environment, the client can begin to express herself freely. And in many ways, I think of playrooms where I'm a child and family therapist by training, and I think of how important playrooms are for children in terms of that holding environment, where we meticulously put away everything that's been taken down from shelves and worked with and transformed so that the following week, when child comes back, it's exactly where they're looking for it and in the way that they experienced it. And that sense of safety and comfort and reassurance is always there. So critical to this process is the therapist's manner and interaction and the client's unique background and life experience, because these two things come together in this sacred vessel. A lot of studies indicate that the key to therapeutic success starts at the very beginning. And it starts with something that we've referred to as the therapeutic alliance. It's where therapist and client join, where the fit happens, the puzzle pieces fit snugly. And in the early stages of therapy, this supersedes any level of skill, any level of training, any level of experience that a therapist might bring to the situation. You could have the most knowledgeable, most trained therapist working with the client, but if therapeutic alliance doesn't happen, you've stopped before you've started. So there are many variables, client variables, that can facilitate this process or hinder it. And these variables, which really relate to how unique our clients are, how unique we all are, need to be acknowledged and respected and understood. And these factors that enter into this are fairly straightforward. There's the age of the client, there's the gender and ethnicity of the client, there's the temperament and the social supports. Judgment is withheld and compassion is paramount. We can't form that alliance otherwise. And trust is really what builds the work. So at the start of therapy, we're really trying to answer a couple of questions. The first is, what's the problem? How long, how deep, how complicated, how fixable is the problem? And so there's an assessment of, is this something transitional? Is this something chronic? Is this something genetic? Is this something based in some sort of trauma or experience? So there's a getting to know. At the same time, and also critical to the work, is an understanding of the strengths that the client brings. To what degree is the client got currently the capacity, the ability, the strength, the resilience to be able to do this work? And we know that at the heart of it, the impetus for the change, the transformation that's going to happen, is a lack of equilibrium. So as the client tells her story, the therapist listens, consoles, reflects, and guides. And the client gains insight and skill in dealing with the circumstances that brought them in the first place. So the sense of hope and relief and acceptance and courage and self-empowerment become real goals in the therapeutic process for the client. And what we desire is to have the client see themselves as competent, as capable. As the early alchemists found out, therapists know that we can't change lead into gold in the physical and spiritual sense. Clients bring their own ingredients to the transformative vessel. They bring intelligence or lack thereof. They bring resilience or lack thereof, social supports, life experience, genetic factors. And all of these can help or hinder the process. And so too, the therapist brings their own training and skill and innate ability to this experience. I've always said that, having trained many, many young clinicians, that there's a part of this work that I can absolutely and totally train somebody in, the technical side of the job, if you will. There's a part of this work which is pure art. You either have it, you either bring it, you either draw it forth, or you don't. And it's the interface between the two, I think, that makes for the process to be successful. So finally, when clients go through this process, I think of it as a journey. I think of it not as a destination, not as healing, but a process towards healing. And I'm often reminded of the concept of good enough. And I carry that with me. Good enough therapy, good enough client-therapist interaction, good enough outcome. And I, perfectionistic though I be and long for, I've tried over the years to be more realistic in terms of saying, there may still be a few little cracks in that vessel. And the glaze may not have set just right. And I wish I'd used a little more of this color or that. But at the end of the day, we've got something that's much more whole than broken and much more complete and absolutely transformed from where we started. The last thing that I want to say to you is that often therapists, in bringing this themselves to this work, absorb the process. And they absorb the pain, the frustration, the feeling of being overwhelmed, the anger that the client brings into session. And we call that transference. We call that a lot of things, actually, as it plays out, including compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma. And so it's so important for the catalyst, for the alchemist, for the joiner in the process to be self-aware and to also practice healing, not just for their client, but also for themselves. My 5 minutes are up, and so I leave you with this one thought, which is to say this process is a gift. I relish it. I feel honored to be able to walk with those who allow me to enter into their journey, and I feel that each and every time I grow from it, I learn from it, I'm strengthened, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to do that. So thank you.